the pre-Matan Torah time period, a moral code of sorts had evolved, and eventually a series of 7 categories were adopted by Avraham and then transmitted to his descendants. These became known as the Sheva Mitzvot de Bnei Noach, in that the family of Yaakov up until Matan Torah had the status of a Ben Noach. We touched upon the assertion by Rashi that subsequent to the flood there had been an acceptance of certain restrictions against sexual immorality, and while post-Matan Torah these restrictions were amplified and specified, the specifics of what comes under the category of sexual immorality within the context of the Sheva Mitzvot de Bnei Noach remain basically undefined. And it is the assertion of the Rebbe that in the pre-Matan Torah situation we needed to look at some of the specifics in order to define what was to be classified as a violation of Arayat laws. 2 incidents are recorded in the text. We will now look at the first of those 2 incidents, the abduction and rape of Dinah, recorded in Bereshit Perek 34. In Pasuk 7 of that Perek, we are told that when the brothers, coming from their work in the field, hear of what had happened to Dinah, Vayit'atzavu, they were somewhat traumatized, and Vayicha lahem ma'od, resulting in a great deal of pent-up anger. Eventually, 2 of the brothers took things into their own hands, and following the negotiations between Shechem's father and Yaakov, in which there was an agreement for them to undertake a form of Brit Milah, Shimon and Levi armed themselves, and while the male members of the entire tribe were in the state of recovering from the Brit Milah, they attack and basically slaughter all the male members of the tribe. Vayavo al ha'ir betach, they secretly come upon the city, and vayahargu kol zachar, and kill every male. And then the pasuk goes on to tell us that ve'et chamor ve'et Shechem beno hargu lefi charev, they also killed Shechem and Chamor, and vayichu Dinah mi beit Shechem vayetzu, they release Dinah from her supposedly imprisonment with the Shechem, and they leave. This incident is quite problematic, in that their actions appeared to conflict with another of the Sheva Mitzvot de Bnei Noach, and that is a prohibition against murder. And even more problematic is that while the killing of Shechem and Chamor might have been somewhat justified, there would seem to be no justification for the killing of the entire male population of the city of Shechem. Almost every one of the Parshanei Chumash attempt to justify the actions of Shimon and Levi, and in order to do so, a number of assumptions are made. Assumption number 1 is that the Sheva Mitzvot de Bnei Noach, while possibly reflecting tribal lore, were eventually adopted into Torah lore. Which came from which? From Yaakov to the Ummot HaOlam, or from the Ummot HaOlam to the family of Yaakov, would be a matter of debate and one's faith perspective. Assumption number 2, that Yaakov and his family would not have violated Torah law. In fact, there are viewpoints that argue that not only did Yaakov and possibly his family abide by the Sheva Mitzvot, they also observed many of what later was to become the Taryag Mitzvot. And on the basis of these 2 assumptions, we reach a third assumption, and that is that the actions of Shimon and Levi must have been legally sanctioned under the laws of the Sheva Mitzvot de Bnei Noach. Which brings us to point 4, that the abduction and rape of a woman was a violation of the Sheva Mitzvot de Bnei Noach. And as such, whereas in post-Matan Torah there was a range of punishments for the violation of Taryag Mitzvot, pre-Matan Torah the violation resulted in death. And therefore the killing of Shechem and Chamor by Shimon and Levi can be justified on the basis that they were carrying out the punishment phase of one who had violated one of the Sheva Mitzvot de Bnei Noach. Justification for the killing of the inhabitants of Shechem, the city, and for that matter Shechem's father Chamor, is somewhat more problematic, an issue that is amplified in the actual Sikha of the Rebbe.